Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today I want to talk about the common misconception that fishing is no good if the sun is out. Now, I personally feel like the sun can be a true advantage for the anglers, but overall, a lot of people would say if it's a bright sunny day, there's no point in going fishing when it's noon and you've got the sun high up in the sky because the fish are not going to be active. Now, that may be true to a point. Maybe you're not going to catch as many fish just going down a random bank. But if you know how to utilize the sun and shade lines, you can really use it to your advantage. It's one of my favorite things to do is to fish during the brightest part of the day because I know that the fish are going to be in one of the easiest to identify locations. So I want to give you guys today 5 reasons why having the sun out can be to your advantage. These are some things that will definitely help you break down your local fisheries and to be able to catch a lot more fish when the sun is out. And these tips honestly hold true throughout the year across the country. They really hold true for all bass species, but they actually hold true for pretty much all fish species as well. If you can implement these on your local lakes for whatever fish you're targeting, you're probably going to catch more fish. So before I get into that, I do want to remind you, if you're looking for a little bit of help on your local lakes, I do a bunch of lake breakdowns with fishthemoment.com. We provide 40 waypoints based on that specific season for a bunch of different patterns and strategies. A great way to help you break down those lakes. So check those out. I'll put the link in the video description. Also, if you want to support the channel in another way and you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. It's a great way to show your support for these tips that I'm providing. And hopefully it's tips like today's that really are, reasons you keep coming back to the channel. So let's get into the first way that I believe the sun can be used to your advantage. Overall, most people would always tell you to fish the shade banks. Meaning if you've got 2 banks, you pull up into a bay or a cove or a creek, you got one side that's generally going to be shaded, one side that's going to be sun exposed. And most people would tell you to fish the shaded bank. I'm here to tell you to fish the sun exposed bank. And this is pretty simple. This is something I learned from Andy Morgan, one of my first years on tour. He kind of threw me for a loop when he answered the same way that I'm going to answer right now. He basically said, I would much rather fish the sun-exposed bank than a shaded bank because the few objects on that sun-exposed bank are going to act like fish magnets. And what that means is if you've got one dock or an overhanging tree or a thick clump of grass or pads, those are going to be areas that the fish are going to migrate to because the sun is out. They generally don't like just to sit with the sun beating on their back. So from that standpoint, what you're going to be looking for are the few objects on that bank that the fish are going to move to get out of the sunlight. It really can take a shoreline that may have a whole pile of different objects and break it down to where there's only 3 or 4 prime locations to fish. If you fish that shaded side, you may end up having to fish the entire bank because the fish aren't going to be tight to objects. They're going to be roaming the bank and you're going to have to fish much slower. So you can be much more efficient fishing the sun-exposed bank. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 goes back to the docks. Now, generally, everyone goes, yep, you want to go fish the docks when the sun is out. 100% true. I love fishing docks on sunny days. And again, it goes back to what I just said. Fish tend to pull to those shaded areas. But you can use this tip to break down docks even faster. Almost every dock out there, generally, or at least the best docks out there, have what I call the dark spot. The dark spot is the darkest shadow being cast within that dock. So if you're fishing floating docks, a lot of times that's going to be where the shadow from the roof or the canopy comes down over a portion of the dock. So it's almost like you have two objects. You got the dock itself and the canopy that are providing shade. So you'll have a dark spot, but that dark spot will rotate based on sun position. Maybe you're fishing down a dock here up in the northern country. We have a lot of docks that generally just have, wood planks. They're little short docks with poles, but then they have a pontoon on the dock. Well, the pontoon is going to provide a lot more shade than the dock itself. So the pontoon is probably your good object. Some docks tend to have two different types of arms coming off. So where those two arms meet, that's going to be a better place. Basically what you're looking for, and this is generally visual, is the dark spot. The dark spot is going to be key in terms of locating where the prime part on that dock is. And the brighter the sun, the more obvious it is to identify that dark spot. So we're not only talking shade. So the third thing to talk about here is for some of you offshore fishermen. Guys that like to fish offshore and concentrate on targets like a brush pile or a boulder or some sort of large object that is sunken on the bottom, those will almost always perform better on high sunny days. When the sun is not out, meaning it's overcast, generally what happens is those fish tend to roam around those objects. Well, from that standpoint, it makes them harder to target. When the sun is out, it puts them in that cover or directly next to that cover, and it makes the casting window, the prime area, smaller. So when you know you hit that brush pile, you're in the strike zone. You don't have fish 35 feet away roaming around the brush pile. It makes it much easier to productively and efficiently fish those offshore objects. So I love to fish offshore cover on bright sunny days. So that's the third thing. The fourth has to do again with shade lines, but not necessarily being cast specifically from, you know, a dock or an object right on the bank. This applies quite a bit more to some of your highland impoundments or desert lakes, places where you're basically fishing in canyons and ravines, and you've got much higher shorelines that will actually peak and cut the sun, casting a shade line way out into the water. When you have that, a lot of times that shade line that's way offshore from a mountain that's somewhere between you and the sun, what that will actually do a lot of times is create real direct, sharp lines. Meaning, you know, like if you're fishing the desert lakes, you'll have a very defined line that comes up off the bank. You can have the same if you're fishing. This was happening at Lake of the Ozarks. You got big condo buildings there, and the condos themselves were casting shade lines out over these little bays and marinas, and the fish were actually holding on that shade line. So they were out suspended, out in the middle of the pocket, but as that shade line moved with the sun as it moved, the fish were actually moving with it. So you can fish that shade line itself. What you're looking for generally is a very good, sharp good, sharp shade line. Generally speaking, the farther the object is away, the less that shade line becomes pronounced. But you can still find a very good pattern fishing a shade line off the bank, just out in the middle of nowhere, because the bait will generally hold in that shade as well. If the bait's there, you've got bass there. So that's the fourth thing. The last thing just has to do with where the fish are going to relate as a whole. The thing I love about fishing on sunny days is the fact that you're talking about a lot less fish suspending in the water column. Yes, you're still going to have a lot of fish that are out suspending over super deep water, but if you're fishing, I'm going to say in 20 feet of water or less, a depth that you can still have pretty good sunlight penetration, the brighter the sun, the more the fish relate to the bottom or relate directly to cover, which means in a lot of instances, they're going to be relating to the bottom because that's the cover that's around. Well, if you know the fish are holding tighter to the bottom, it makes your job easier because at that point you can concentrate on your bottom fishing baits and you can concentrate on the bottom couple of feet of the water column to be where most of the fish are. So you can rule out a bunch of baits, you can rule out a bunch of different depth zones of fish and just concentrate on your bottom baits. But those are 5 simple, easy tips where going out on a bright sunny day like I've got here right now, you can actually use the sun to your advantage. The fish will bite just fine. You just got to figure out where they're holding and they'll be more than willing to eat. In fact, a lot of times I think they're in a better ambush location than they would be during low light conditions. So if you enjoyed today's video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned, new video coming out tomorrow.